The Unrelating podcasts are meant to be for education and entertainment. They don't constitute a service or advice. For personal struggles, please reach out to a medical or mental health professional.
Michelle, I have a really personal question for you. You ready for this?
Okay, I'm game.
Have you ever lost a job? And if so, how or why?
Yes, I have. The most recent one, I would say, I was laid off because the rehab that I worked at closed down. I felt very powerless. I had some anger about how everything went down. The clients kind of got abandoned there, and I felt a lot of empathy for that. But then I also felt a lot of fear and like unknown is like, what's going to happen? What's my next steps? But more so, I felt just kind of rejection, and it's hard. Even though there wasn't like a personal reason we got laid off, it still felt like it triggered some embarrassment and feeling like, an ego bruise.
How long did it take you to get back on your feet?
I do remember at one point shifting my perspective and using it as an opportunity. At that time, I was very close to being able to take my licensing exam to get licensed as a therapist.
Okay.
When I shifted my perspective and thought of it as like a great time to be studying and really get that done, I took a little bit of the pressure off myself. And I had, I'm a saver by nature, so I had savings and so I think a month or two where then I took my exam and was able to get licensed. And at that point, I got to really think about next steps in my career in a positive way.
Reversing that question, I've been laid off a couple times and a good learning experience for me. So I tried to leverage it. One time I got laid off and I ended up jumping on a plane to Australia for 3 weeks because I'm like, I'm going to take advantage of this severance check and time off. And that was great for me personally.
Yeah.
The reason I'm asking is because today's guest is somebody who has gone through this experience recently and has just written an article that was published about his experience, which I just read and I was really, really impressed with. So I'm really looking forward to him coming on the show and talking about his struggle.
And that's the right word, is the struggle, because there's the thing that happened and then there's the repercussions of that thing. What I think affected you and I in this article is that he was willing to talk about the consequences and the way he felt about it and what it meant for his sense of self. That's what we want to talk about today.
Welcome to Unrelating with Kel and Michelle, and I'm one of your hosts, Kelly. With me is my co-host, Michelle, a licensed marriage and family therapist who's been providing individual and couples therapy for over 2 decades. Together, we'll explore how we engage in relationships, why we do what we do, and what causes people to unrelate. Joining us today, Arran Skinner. I just read your article on Business Insider and found it really, really moving and just inspiring to me in many ways. And that's why I decided to reach out to you. Basically, the article talks about how you lost your job as a multimedia and press relations expert back in 2023. Since then, you've been trying to find new full-time work and been struggling with that, as many people are nowadays. And it's kind of affected your identity. I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. I personally, and I work in multimedia, or work in entertainment, work in marketing, and have for 25 plus years. And so I've been through a lot of different jobs, and it's been great working in entertainment. But I've certainly had my ups and downs as well in my career. So Arran, thanks for joining us.
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Talk about what really inspired you to write that article and what that process was like.
I needed some money. So I'd been pitching a few times to various people. My wife is a writer. She's a professional writer. She's been writing for years. She just released her first book last year. And so I have a great editor who can really help me put together an essay. I'd written previously, I'd written for The Nation and for HuffPost a couple of times, but I hadn't written for about 3 or 4 years. Partly because of my work, the type of work that I do, I couldn't really talk too much publicly. But now I was out of a job, and so I was pitching articles, and actually Business Insider had mentioned to my wife Melissa that they were looking for articles about people who'd lost their jobs. I felt a little bit nervous talking about, like, losing a job, and I'm going for jobs. Do I really want to put an article out there?
Mm-hmm.
But once I got into it, I'm a big when it. I don't have a lot of confidence in my writing, to be honest, and I kind of procrastinated after the first draft. I didn't want to go back to it. But I actually find whenever I finally do force myself to sit down, I really enjoy writing. It's kind of cathartic a little bit. And I was pleased. Like, I think the best kind of art, writing, painting, music, whatever, reveals something about yourself. And kind of you find out stuff about yourself as you're doing it. So that was really nice. Like I was pleasantly surprised. And I've been really, like, aside from the mean comments on Facebook that the article kind of got, I've been really surprised by the great comments that have come in from complete strangers, people friending me on Facebook, on LinkedIn, saying that they really identify with the article, and also from friends who just checked in on me and said, I didn't know you were going through this. And so in that way, it's been awesome. Like, it really has, it's given me a bit of a confidence boost. I'm not the most confident person.
Arran, can I ask, you said your friends didn't know you were going through this. Did you know you were going through this? Because you mentioned sometimes you find out about yourself when you put something in writing and it all kind of poured out of you. Were those feelings things you had already processed by the time you wrote the article, or did anything surprise you about what came out for you?
I think I'd done a lot of processing since I lost my job. The way that I lost my job was really, really not good. And I felt very bitter and angry. I really loved the job that I did. I'd worked in a couple of big organizations and a small NGO, and I was really doing work that I loved. I felt very, very frustrated at first. I would say about a year and a half, it really began to hit me and sink in what had happened. Despite having very little money, one thing that I did do, which I'm actually really pleased I did, and I realized that this is a privilege that a lot of people can't do, but I decided to go into therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have a lot of money, but I found it's called the New Jersey Institute of Psychoanalysis, I think is the name, for training in psychoanalysis. And so basically you're meeting with students who are training to do psychoanalysis. And so for that reason, they take in low income families. And that's been super helpful. Just doing therapy, finding out about myself, and just speaking to a stranger at first every week, where I could really just kind of vent and complain, and I wasn't being judged. I wasn't being told, well, actually, like, I was just able to get it out, and that was super helpful. I realized that I needed to like reevaluate, take stock of what had happened, and actually like accept. Like, it was kind of like a a death. I don't want to say a tragedy. Died, but like part of me was gone, and it was really tough. Like I say, I really loved the work I did. I really loved the people I worked with, not just the professionals, the diplomats, my colleagues. I loved the people that I was helping. I really, really enjoyed. I was working with oppressed populations around the world, and I was getting to meet them and getting to really like talk about what they were going through, and not just what they were going through. One of my favorite projects was working with Swahili refugees, and I just became immersed in the culture. And when I got to meet the people in person at a refugee forum, I mean, it was like heaven. And not that I was enjoying that these people were suffering, but I really had great respect for what they were doing. They were taking on oppressive regimes and dictators, and so I just thought these people were incredible, and I felt honored to be working with them and trying to help them.
Yeah.
And it was very meaningful to you, which makes the loss even harder.
Yeah.
It was extremely meaningful. And I was one of those people that I trained to be a painter. I went to like a classical art school in New York. But the painting world, I found it very inauthentic. I'm not the type of person who sells myself. And so I was one of those people that kind of like in my early 30s, I still didn't really know what I was doing with myself. And then it just takes one or two people to see what you have inside of you, something that you don't see yourself, and say, let's give this guy a chance. And that's what happened to me. I was very lucky that a couple of people kind of gave me work to do, tried me out, really like worked well with me, and then like kept me in mind when they went to the NGO and pulled me in and like said, come with us. Like, we're going to be doing this great work and we want you on the team. So I really felt like I'd found what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned in the article, losing a job can significantly change your identity, especially if your job informs your sense of self, status, and purpose. Grief and anxiety can aggravate identity crisis. And Michelle, you can speak to this. We tend to really identify with what we do, right?
Mhm.
Michelle, you're a therapist.
Yep.
And that it's very important to you to say that. And I think what you're getting at, Arran, is something similar to that sense of loss, right? With your identity.
As I mentioned in the piece, I feel when you have kids, I don't know if you've got kids, but you really discover stuff about yourself,
Mhm.
stuff that you didn't realize, trauma, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a tough situation. And so my son, when I realized that he had special needs, I discovered also at the same time a lot about myself, that I probably had ADHD. I already knew that I had high anxiety, that I'd kind of begun to recognize. And along with that, I had pretty strong imposter syndrome anyway. So I'm the kind of person that just like, what am I doing here? Like, you've got to fake it to make it. Losing the job, especially a job that really kind of gave me a sense of self-worth, especially like right now where the world is just going to hell. Everything's falling apart. I felt like I was doing something good. Like, I felt
Mm.
like I was contributing in a small way. And that idea really I was really kind of shaken out of that when I lost my job. As I said earlier, I'm not very confident. And I'd really felt like I was tackling that. I was gaining confidence in myself. I was learning to speak up. I was challenging authority, which I thought was something that was quite important in my job. I started off in the UK mission to the UN, so I was working with
Wow.
diplomats. I remember when I was very early on in my career, when I was sitting in rooms with ambassadors and people that I really didn't think I was supposed to be in the same room with. I remember a diplomat talking about how when he first arrived at the UN, been there for a few days, 2 or 3 days, and he'd been given his file of what he was going to be working on. And he was going to his first meeting, his first kind of like where all the diplomats get together and they start to figure out policy. And he was rushing to the meeting. He was reading the notes that he'd been given that he hadn't had time to read. And he was walking into the room thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm so out of my depth. I don't know what I'm going to be. Like, I don't even know what to say. And then very quickly, as he saw everyone else in the room, he realized that everyone else from all the different countries were all in the same situation.
Mm-hmm.
They were all not really experts in their field. And what he realized was that, um, he didn't have to worry. Like, he was who he was, and there was a reason that he'd been picked to do that job. And sure, he was a bit behind and whatnot, but that's what we're all like. And it reminded me of I think it was in the New York Times, there was an article a few years ago that was along the lines of that we're all kind of like kids in adult bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And that idea really spoke to me. I
Yeah.
really began to realize, like, oh, these really important people, they don't know what they're doing. They haven't got a clue. And
Yep.
it's okay to challenge them. And actually, the more that you can be yourself, and admit your they're not even weaknesses or faults. They're just who you are. The more that you can embrace that and differentiate yourself, the more you'll be accepted and the more that you can kind of challenge the world. And really, we're all experts in our own experience. And it's not, imposter syndrome makes you think that you're faking it, but you're not. It's the world that's fake. It's the world that's inauthentic. And that's what makes you feel like that. So kind of becoming aware of that, just it just gave me a confidence that I'd never had before.
We also tend to think that the opposite of imposter syndrome is being an expert in the room, but that's not the opposite of imposter syndrome. The opposite is feeling like you have something to give, something to contribute. And if we can reframe it that way, then almost anyone would say, yeah, actually, I do feel like I have something I could contribute here.
I've heard someone say that everybody has imposter syndrome. It's to some level. Everybody has it. Okay. Just to what degree. And then knowing that information actually is very empowering because I've experienced it as well, certainly.
I have too, but I'm also wary of people who haven't. Like people who don't have imposter syndrome, I'm a little bit more skeptical of.
Yeah. Like, why? Why aren't you feeling a little insecure? What's wrong with you?
Exactly. And the people that have the overconfidence or they're so sure of what they're doing are usually, I mean, I don't want to say, draw a wide kind of net, but often people doing harm because they see the world their way. And that's the way the world has to be. And they're not willing to see the kind of gray and the people who bring different things to the table.
I see imposter syndrome too is just another way of opening myself up to learning, where I don't have all the answers. I'm not going to be afraid to ask questions because I don't know. And as long as I think you admit that, I think, ultimately it puts you in a better light too.
Saying I don't know is one of the three most important phrases to be able to say. I don't know. I'm sorry, and I need help.
Yeah.
We're so full of experts, like talking heads on the TV every day, the same talking heads on the TV, talking about like whatever. And we're never talking to the actual affected populations, the actual people who they're like, talking about. And so I love it when a question is asked on the radio. I listen to WNYC here, the NPR, and I love it when the person, the guest, the expert that's been brought on says, I don't know the answer to that question. It's so refreshing. Like it builds credibility for me.
Yeah, I agree.
You said people don't, talk to the actual people who are being affected. I also work with marginalized communities. And one of our mantras is have them at the table, not on the table.
That's very much what Independent Diplomat was about. It was all about actually working with the affected populations, and their job was to advise them, not to tell them what to do. So to find out what it was that was the problem, and then to help them it was, the cliche, have a seat at the table, nothing about us without us.
I want to touch on one thing you was mentioned earlier, but like I read a lot of articles about leadership. And I think one of the things that I've taken away from this is the fact that good leaders listen. Okay. They listen, number one. And number two, they admit when they don't know something. That's something that I've sort of incorporated into my style, my leadership style. And I think it's benefited me because I'm not going to pretend. Okay. I mean, I think you look like an a-hole, quite frankly, when you do that. So I don't know. I just want to add that little nugget to our conversation earlier about that.
But can I say, because I would say both of you have said in different points that you lacked confidence in some way. But I think it takes more confidence to say you don't know. So you think you're not confident, but really you have to be a little bit more secure with yourself to be able to be out there. Well, it takes a vulnerability.
You don't want to look weak, right, Aaron? I mean, but ultimately, I think there's something to being vulnerable too, right? And ultimately, I think you do come across as more genuine.
As men, we are constantly told that we have to be the leaders, the experts, and men who aren't vulnerable in that way, they're often like telling you their expert opinion on issues that they actually know nothing about.
Even the word association we use, though, is so linked to, we're talking about vulnerability, and Kelly, you immediately jump to weak. So that's also happens for men too, as we start talking about these feelings that should be very normalized and okay and manageable.
Yeah.
But your brains are trained to associate them with other words that aren't considered.
It's
As,
unfortunate, but you're right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's backwards thinking. I think it's old school thinking, and I don't think it's helpful. It's not healthy for sure.
It's a real shame in our society. I do think that men right now are, at least through my lifetime, going through an identity crisis. I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of young men might have a kind of imposter syndrome around masculinity. But it's a conversation that needs to be had. And it's really important because men, at least when I was growing up, the kind of in the 70s and 80s, um, it was all about macho, leather gloves, like a fast car, and no expression of vulnerability, or I'd be called a sissy, or
Mm-hmm.
just dumb, like toxic masculine elder people who really didn't know what they were talking about. And all that did for me when I was finally, like, an adult or a kid in an adult body, I didn't know how to process my feelings, and it would just come out as anger.
Mm-hmm.
I see that so much, that it's just that we haven't been taught how to process our feelings and how to process, that we're not perfect, or that we're not like matching up to this dumb ideal that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
even really mean anything. It's just tropes, in a way.
Yeah.
When you have a loss, like your job loss that you were talking about in your article, that masculinity, that macho-ness delays grief, which
Yeah,
then compounds grief.
100%.
And I want to mention, Aaron. I worked in entertainment. I mentioned it to you already, and have for quite a while. But I have a lot of friends too, and who are in a similar field as us, and who are struggling right now. And I have conversations with them. I just had lunch with the other day with a buddy of mine who's a little older, but he's struggling. He's a producer. I think is it ageism, or is it just the economy, or is it just the consolidation we're seeing with all these companies and especially in LA? It's sort of a microcosm for the rest of the country because we are an industry city, right? And just like Detroit's a industry city, there is a lot of that going on right now. Okay. And I can speak to it. There's a lot of men who are looking for work, or trying to find, maybe not looking for work, but trying to find their calling, I guess.
Yeah,
And I'm not embarrassed to say this, but I went in entertainment because I love it and find it very exciting.
yeah,
As I get older, and one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is because I'm starting to pivot in my career, and I'm trying to find ways that I can give back and things that I can do personally that I find more fulfilling, right?
yeah,
Because at the end of the day, when I'm 85, am I going to be, what am I going to be proud of? You
yeah,
know, and that's really what matters, I think. And ultimately, what impact can I have? Positive impact can I have in my community?
yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
thoughts?
I think there's also, we had this, when I was growing up, I grew up in the UK, in London, and we had three channels. And it was the same kind of guy reading the news, an old white guy reading the news. When I started at the UK mission, I started as a security officer. Around the time of the Iraq War, I was getting a lot of calls, people telling me, just say to the ambassador, like, don't invade Iraq. And I'm like, oh, yeah, he's going to listen to me. When I left the UK mission, we were doing Twitter Q&As with the ambassador. He had been forced to begin speaking to the public. And so we've lived in the last 20 years with this kind of amazing leveling of media where everyone has the opportunity to put out their video, to speak, to say what they think. And that's fantastic. That's amazing. But I think what we're seeing in the last 5 or 6 years is a real pushback against that, a real pushback against diversity, obviously, a real pushback that we're we're no longer a white society, that we're a society of people from all sorts of backgrounds. And I think along with that, there's a real meanness that has kind of invaded our culture at the moment, a real kind of lack of compassion. And that's tough if you're getting older. It's tough. You're already losing foot of the popular culture. And I think Gen X, it's a cliche that we're the forgotten generation.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of like, the boomers above us. And
Mhm.
I'll be frank, it's true. I mean, boomers have taken up so much space, whether
Yeah.
it's how they've affected the economy, how they've kind of hoarded wealth, but also just the culture. Like boomers really see themselves as, we fixed it in the 60s. And what are you kids still like, why are you still fighting about this? And we
Mm-hmm.
had David Bowie and the Beatles. And they don't realize that they were like a confluence of like the generation after a war, that like the whole society was like helping them, institutions were being built. Yeah, it's tough for Gen X. I hate to we have, we're the coolest generation. I'm sorry, like we have to do it ourselves.
Also, though, like we kind of have to be the grown-ups in the room at this
Yeah,
phase in our life, because I call it like the petulance swing, where the boomers get to be petulant, the younger generations get to be petulant. Someone's got to be the adult in the room. So even though we're cool and alternative, we also have like wisdom and pragmatism, and we get take care of business. Whereas I think what you're talking about with your children, and I see it in mine as well, is like they get to be hopeful and self righteous
yeah.
and adventurous and just be like, do what they want and conquer the world.
Mhm.
Hopefully, they have the opportunity to do that. But yeah,
And also like right all of the wrongs and the like
right.
mess that
Yeah.
I mean we've had part in too. Like we're all responsible for what's going on. Um, yeah,
And they get to hold all the anger too that we all have about what's going on in the world,
Mhm.
and and actually go out there and fight for it. Not that
Yeah.
we can't.
I have a lot of hope for
Yeah.
uh, anyone who's younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be one of these people that is like very positive about that.
My one caveat, my one hope for the younger generations is that they can just slow down enough to be better informed, because I
Mhm.
love the spirit, but I feel like they need more accurate information to go off of when they're out there fighting.
That's a huge issue right now. Is our
Yeah.
media literacy and understanding how to read information. Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the biggest problems right now. Is we've really lost that, or we didn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
I think of my son,
Yeah.
and just knowing that his understanding of media, his connection to it, or his engagement with it was I mean, we're Gen X. We grew up. We didn't have computers when we were growing up. We were the generation that got to experience the analog world, and then had to transition to the digital world.
Yep.
We're kind of lucky that we see both sides of that.
Yes.
But
It,
he
it,
didn't. He
it,
didn't
But
realize that.
like from his birth, he's living in a different world. His brain's going to be wired differently. I was just
Exactly.
talking to someone about this. How I didn't get a cell phone till I graduated college, and that was because I moved out to LA. But
mm-hmm.
here in LA as well, we have the Waymo cars, the self-driving cars, the ones that
Mhm.
don't have a driver. And kids are just growing up as that's a given. That's on the
Yeah.
road. That's something that exists. There's nothing weird about it. Where we're just our minds are blown. Every time I see
Yeah.
one, I'm like, what is happening?
They creep me out. They really do.
Yeah. It's a different
But to
world.
them, that's going to be the epitome of normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but it gives us, I think, to your point, Aaron, it gives us good perspective as Gen X, because we have seen analog and now we see this digital world, and we kind of get both. Well, we do
Yeah.
get both, So I think it sets us up for success in the future, because I feel like, okay, we're ready for it, whatever it is, we're ready for it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, you mentioned also, I want to touch on AI, but like you talk about, your kids and how they're understanding everything so quickly. I feel like with AI, especially because we all know AI right now is blowing up, right? Taking jobs, taking
Mhm.
opportunities potentially from people. How do we, as professionals, leverage that technology so it benefits us? And how do we learn about it? Because I'm trying to learn all this stuff. In fact, I'm going to take some AI courses, I think, just so I can catch up. How do you feel about that?
I have a lot of friends who are painters, who are artists, and as soon as AI came, kind of
Mm,
the images began appearing, there was a big pushback from that community, and an anger,
Mm-hmm.
frankly, about. the stealing of our history, our past creations, to make this new content. Um, I'm very pro technology to a fault. I work for a book publishing company in LA. I've started doing project management, some part time work.
Cool.
We're using AI as I'm sure pretty much everyone is now. And one of the conversations we've been having is, how do you use AI? Do we want to have a joint account? Where we're all inputting into this one kind of account. And I realized, well, AI is so quick at like getting into your voice and understanding is the wrong word, but replicating your style. That if we all input into this one account, what style is going to come out? It's not gonna keep writing in the style of the executive director or the one of the writers. And I kind of think that that's true of AI content, that unless you've got work that is exploring the human condition, ultimately it's just going to become this kind of like just kind of very boring.
Yeah, speaking of the human condition, I want to pivot for a second because you mentioned you're a classically trained painter, but it hasn't been part of your career as of late. Have you used painting in any kind of self care or mental health way?
I kind of had a reaction against the art world when I decided I wasn't going to be a painter and I wanted to get into like just media in general. And my son has amazed me, my daughter as well, because they both love drawing and like creating art, and just seeing them do that has been I forget the word you use, but has helped me. And occasionally I'll pick up a pencil and draw with them. But it's reminded me that art, whatever kind of art, is a kind of balm for the soul. That it's there to reinvigorate you. When I was unemployed, had some substance abuse issues. I was really struggling, and when I finally said, "Okay, I've got to," well, I didn't say, my wife said, "You need to like sort yourself out." Um, I just rediscovered like all the music that I used to love. Like I just started listening to Dinosaur Jr. again and being like, "Oh my god, this is amazing."
Yeah,
Never
they're
listened
great.
before when I was high, but it like it. I was surprised. I thought you needed to get high to enjoy art, and I realized like, no, this is kind of It's the kick that I need instead of the getting high.
I wanted to go back. One thing that stands out for me, because you did mention your wife a couple times here and in the article,
Yeah.
just about the dynamics that changed when you were looking for work and the burden you felt as trying to be a provider. And I don't know if you could speak a little more to how you and your wife communicated through that time. Because you showed a lot of grace in the article towards your wife, and in turn you said she was showing you a lot of grace, but you had some feelings like it must have been hard for her. So in terms of how you guys were communicating your feelings around what was happening.
Yeah, my wife, around the time that I lost my job, had just got her book deal, and so she was writing her book. It's called "Shame on You" by Melissa Petros. So check it out, and it's all about shame in our society. Uh, so while I was going through this thing where I was losing my job, I was very angry. I felt a lot of injustice. She was at the peak of her career. She'd been like, I don't want to say struggling, but she'd been like working to getting a book deal for 20 years. I mean, it's like she suddenly had her dream. And so that discrepancy, you try not to let it get to you, but I mean, it's right there in your face.
Yeah.
I wasn't making any money anymore. And my wife, who was a freelance writer, was having to carry us. We were already in a bit of a difficult spot when I lost my job in terms of our relationship. And we were also dealing with trying to figure out what was going on with our son. Part of the reason that I'd lost my job was because my manager was basically trying to get me to reduce my hours and pay so that I could, because they knew that I was trying to figure out what was going on with my son, trying to get him into an appropriate school. He'd been expelled at the age of 4. And when something like that happens, you're just dealing with trying to understand the situation. You don't know what the solution is. You're trying to figure it out. And so we were just dealing with a lot. And yeah, the discrepancy between what was happening in our lives. And it really sucks when you're not making any money and you're not bringing any money in, and maybe your mind is consumed with what's just happened to you, and you're not focused on what you should be doing, which is like, moving forward or getting on. And I credit my wife for at times really kind of like shaking me and saying like, you got to get a grip. You're not doing what you should be doing. At the same time, the fact that I lost my job meant that I was spending a lot more time with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting to experience something that a lot of particularly men don't get to experience because they're working in the city or they're not at home. I was now at home all the time, and it was just there was the switch up in roles.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
my wife became the provider and I was essentially a house husband. And yeah, it's tough, it's complicated, and it doesn't help when you're already dealing with a problem and then you've got financial issues. And when you've got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, my daughter Molly, I love her to bits. She's very chatty. She's got a lot to say, a lot of like important things that she wants to get off your chest, and she doesn't care if you're having like a mental breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really like painful for me when I realized that sometimes my kids were aware, especially Molly, or she's very, very empathetic. Even for a 5-year-old, she really, really kind of tunes in and understands people. Yeah, it was really upsetting. Either when she was like babbling on about dolls or whatever it is that she wanted to talk about, and you're looking at the bills mounting up and you scream, you want to explode, but you've got to maintain, I think, as I said in the article, you've got to maintain this, this environment that's nutritious for them, that's safe and warm and helpful, or you're fighting with your partner because you don't know how you're going to pay for a big problem that we had. We were lucky that we found a great school for Oscar, our son.
It sounds like you and your wife really had to communicate, right, Michelle, and really get on the same page here. We're both in the same boat, rowing the same direction, right?
And that's tough. That can be
Right.
really tough when you're going through feeling that you've become devalued, or you're not providing, or you're worried that you're going to be kind of forgotten.
Or if your fear lets you take on worry that your wife is going to think you have less worth, or
Mhm. Exactly.
have more angst, start having more resentment. A lot of times, I'm not saying you did this, but for the sake of generalizing, a lot of times what people in that situation can do is start having projections. So they
Yes.
might be feeling worthless, but then they'll, if their spouse asks, like, how was the job hunt? They'll attack the spouse because they'll be like, you think I feel worthless. And even though that's not what you're putting out, like, that's the undercurrent of the message I've decided you're giving me.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that. And I do feel grateful that I decided to do therapy, admittedly at a very reduced cost and not with health insurance, but that really helped. It really made me. Well, I mean, one thing that it did was realize how much trauma had come from my childhood, and how much both of us, my wife included, that a lot of what we were going through was repeated patterns from our past. And that actually what we were arguing about, whatever it was, whether it was the dirty dishes or whatever, the clothes that my daughter wanted to wear, it wasn't actually about the dirty dishes or the clothes that my daughter wanted to wear. It was that we were repeating past trauma that we just didn't identify. And we're still working, I'm still working on that, definitely. But yeah, I know that that's not, you're unemployed, you're looking for a job. The last thing you want to do is see a therapist. But I was very lucky that I found the place that I did, because, as I say, they were willing to work with low income families. And when I went in one day and said, I can't keep paying for this, I like, they reduced the price. They like said, "Don't worry,
Mm-hmm.
like we're here for you. Don't worry about payment. We'll continue seeing you."
You mentioned in the article, you say at one point, she said, or your therapist said, you don't know your core personality. Other people are different. They know in their core who they are. Can you expand on that a little bit and how you find or are finding your core or your purpose?
Yeah, that was a big thing for me. That only happened about a month and a half ago. It's very recent.
Oh, okay.
We've been having a conversation, and I had been talking about growing, like my experience growing up with my parents. I realized, or I didn't realize, my therapist made the point, and this connects to imposter syndrome. I'm the sort of person where if you give me a compliment, I have a hard time accepting it. I push it away. I don't like it. I don't like being praised. It's something that had come up, and my therapist just basically said what I wrote down. She said like, she just said to me, you are a good father, and I pushed. I don't think so. Like, blah blah blah. Here's all the reasons why I'm not a good father.
Mm,
And she said, most people know inside whether they're a good father or not. And if it's not about being a good father, they know they have a core feeling about themselves. And she quite bluntly said, You don't. You don't think that you're a good father. You don't have a confidence um, in yourself. The only thing that I genuinely feel I have a confidence in is media. Like, I feel like I just understand
mm,
media. If someone asks me to design something, even if they hate it, I don't like, I just feel confident in, like, it takes me 2 seconds. I don't worry about what I'm going to do. I just sit down and I create.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it really hit me hard. I really did like walk out of there going like, I don't know what my core is. Like, I don't know who I am. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm empty inside.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that kind of hit me pretty hard. Because it's something that I kind of knew anyway, but no one had ever like said it to me, like had actually said, like, when I give you a compliment, when I tell you if someone says, someone on Facebook once said like you're handsome or whatever, I just pushed it down and I was like, that's not true. I've got a big nose and I'm ugly, and recognizing, regardless of what the subject was, that inside I was kind of empty. Um, yeah, it really made me think, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd realized that my identity had been, it shouldn't be tied to your work, but I really love what I did, and knowing that had been taken away from me. Um, I guess it just made me think about, what does that mean? Is it okay? Like, obviously I have got a core, obviously I have got something inside of me,
Yeah.
but I wasn't willing to accept it. I wasn't willing to acknowledge it.
it's highly likely if you've had trauma in your childhood that you didn't get a chance to develop your core because you are more likely living in reaction to the things happening around you or the people around you rather
That's
than
very
building a foundation of who you are. You then are the version of you that's a reaction to other people versus who you
exactly.
actually are. Now, of
Yeah,
course,
that's
there's
100% true.
yeah, there's resilience. You can if you have some intervention, if you have some loving caregivers that kind of can shore you up again after a trauma, that's a huge protective factor. But a lot of people don't get that. And so they're adults with this trauma that, like you said with your wife, you are not reacting to the thing in the moment. You
Mhm.
are reacting to something that happened 30 years ago. You just don't know that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that is very, very true. I was a very highly anxious child. I like had OCD. I had no belief in myself. Anytime there was a test or I was a swimmer and I would go to galas, I'd be pacing back and forth. Even today, like ahead of this interview, I was like, I was feeling nervous.
Yeah.
And Zoloft helped when I finally started taking Zoloft.
Mm-hmm.
That really helped with my anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I still suffer anxiety, but it allows me to just say, "Oh, there's anxiety. Like that's,
Yeah.
it would be crippling for me. I wouldn't be able to perform. I would just completely mess up. I would be just like, even social situations, when I moved from the city where you know never talk to anyone, moving to the suburbs and buying a house. I couldn't, like, every weekend we had to meet someone new, and it was all about community. And I would hide inside. I didn't want to meet anyone. I just couldn't understand why I needed to make all these new friends. And it was anxiety. And yeah, like that really came from my childhood. It came from, I think, in a large part, having a pretty strong, powerful uh, figures in my life, and not relating to that, not relating to, as I say, the kind of the men, and like being in experiences with other men, and just finding myself just not relating at all, to the language, to the way they were talking, to what they thought was cool. And I just learned, I trained myself to kind of make myself small, and to let others kind of be in charge. And that was trauma. That was definitely trauma.
Protection, self protection too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because I relate, but I consider myself a very nervous person. So everything makes me nervous, but I don't consider myself a generally anxious person.
What's the difference?
And that's what I want to talk about because there is a difference. It's hard to articulate, but I feel like when we use the word anxiety, again, we're talking about how we message things to ourselves. There's something that feels more pervasive and personality based about that. Like, I'm an anxious person, it gets tied to your identity.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, I think of myself as nervous because situations come up that make me nervous, meeting a new client, meeting new people, going out like in crowds, taking a test. All these things make me nervous, but it's not that I'm sitting there just being a nervous person.
Mm.
Whereas a lot of times we tie anxiety so much to our identity that we say, I'm an anxious person, regardless
Mm-hmm.
of what's happening around me. That's just who I am.
Yeah, it's true. There is a difference, I think, between nervousness and anxiety. I've never thought of myself as a nervous person, but I think I act nervously because of my anxiety. As you say, it was part of my personality. I didn't realize that I was a person with high anxiety. I just figured everyone was the same as me. And it was only, when I used to smoke a lot of weed, I mean, like literally every hour. And it was only when, like, my partner said to me, like, you're self medicating.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're self medicating because you are anxious.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's only when I began to realize. And I think that's something that's actually kind of tied in. Like, you only really begin to see yourself through the eyes of others. It's like when you look in the mirror, you're seeing a reflection. You're not actually seeing how other people see you. Like that, like when you take that iPhone picture, and it used to like
Yeah.
flip, you'd be like, "Who the hell's that?" And then it would flip to to the one you want to see. So both times when I went through a divorce in a previous marriage, and it was only like, that, like, I'd been in a 10-year relationship. Our identities had become entwined, and when I came out of that, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know who I what my identity was. And it was exhilarating because I got to reinvent myself. I felt like I was in free fall. But what defined me was all the people who, my family, people who I didn't even know were friends, similar to when I released this article, people reaching out to me and telling me who I am, saying to me, like, oh, you've got this going on and you've got that going on, and like, we'll help you do this and you can do this. I didn't realize I had so much support. And it was that kind of, I was still an anxious person. I still had high anxiety, but I was now surrounded by this support group that I'd really like. I hadn't, like, I hadn't tended to. I hadn't like watered the plants of my friendships. I'd been very like insular, but I was just shocked at how people who I thought didn't even care for me, even on this article, the first few comments on my personal posting were from people who I figured had like left me for dust years ago, but were like sending me the most warm and like self-affirming comments. I'm like shocked, like, people even care, like, that they would even read something that I wrote. And that really helped with, I like the last week or the last few days since I wrote the piece, I've had a high, like a natural,
Mm-hmm.
I can write, I'm a writer, and like I made something that people read and people liked, and all of the mean comments I've even enjoyed, because my wife, I used to fight a lot on Facebook, and my wife used to say, like, you never want to be in the comments. You want to be the person writing the article.
Yeah.
And like when I first wrote my article, I started getting I'd written a piece about my daughter, and I was getting some mean comments, and I really wanted to respond. And she's like, never get into the comments. Like, you never want to be in the comments. You want to be the person that everyone's commenting about, and stay above that. And so, like, I was reading all of these comments, people who know nothing about me, and I was enjoying it. It was funny. Like, it was funny. Like, I was reading them in funny voices in the cafe, because, like, they were responding to something that I wrote, and that just blew my brain. That was wild to me that I'd managed to do that. Even a couple of people, like, underneath the piece were like, "You're famous," like, like.
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, for a little bit, I am, like, whatever.
Well, look, Aaron, I think you can definitely feel proud of yourself, because you by writing this article, you have impacted people in a positive way. And certainly,
Can I interrupt you, Kelly? Just to ask, are you capable of feeling proud of yourself?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
okay,
Like,
you should.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think you should. No, I think you should be very
Kelly's
proud.
about to praise you, and I probably will too. And I just want to see if you're going to be able to absorb it.
That's very kind. That's very kind. Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
It impacted me. That's why we reached out to you. And certainly I can relate to many of the feelings you have. So from that standpoint, it spoke to me on a personal level. And I'm sure it speaks to many other people.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think also the reason I think a lot of people are connecting to what you wrote, and why would they will connect to what you said here with us on the show, is because you're being honest, and you are being vulnerable, and you're putting words to feelings people have that are difficult.
Mm-hmm.
There's rejection, there's shame, there's all these feelings we don't want to feel when we're laid off, or we lose a job. The loss, the kind of aimlessness that you feel when you're trying to get another job, like all of that stuff just feels so satisfying when you have felt that and you hear someone else has felt that too. That's what empathy is, really. But particularly when we feel like there's a void in empathy in our current culture, to put that stuff out there, to not care about the people that are gonna like judge it, and care more and prioritize more of the people that are going to relate to it. That's a beautiful gift.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I do think we're in a kind of, I don't want to use the word cancel culture, because I hate that term, but we are in a kind of a very unforgiving time. And I think it's useful to see in the past that, like, we made some mistakes, or we weren't the best version of ourselves, and that there's a story there that can relate to others. It's about paying attention and about learning, and I also, like we keep saying, it's about recognizing what we don't know, being okay with that, and like being willing to, like, not have to have an opinion on it, or not have to be the expert, which I do think is a very kind of male thing that men feel the need to do. We have to understand everything and, like, tell you our opinion on it, and that's really not important.
And also, one of my least favorite phrases is it is what it is, or it's always been done that way. I hate those. But the idea that just because society is normalizing certain things, is judging things like nuance and compromise and accommodation and empathy, doesn't mean that we need to go along with the society. We can still value those things and fight for those things.
Yeah.
Well, look, Arran, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast. We really appreciate you saying yes. So thank you so much.
Yes.
And we really appreciate you writing this article, because I think it was fantastic. So thank you so much.
Enjoyed this. This has been awesome. Thanks so much for talking to me today.
I'm glad that it highlighted for you that there's so many people rooting for you. It's nice to be reminded of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is true.
Arran Skinner is a multimedia and press relations expert, Arran, where can we find you?
You can find me at my website, which is arranskinner.com. It is a funny spelling. It's an island in Scotland. So the name is Arran, and then Skinner, SKINNER.com. I have the perfect serial killer name. So
that means you can't be a serial killer then, because
it's too obvious.
It's too easy.
Oh yeah, I'm not a serial killer.
Uh-oh, if you feel the need to say it, shoot.
Thanks so much for speaking to me today.
No, thank you for talking to us today. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
I love this conversation, Michelle. I don't know. I almost got emotional at one point talking to him because I just felt like he was hitting on so many great important little points or big points that it's almost hard to break each one down. But touching on themes of like, who am I? What am I? What am I doing? Expectations, imposter syndrome, so many things that I think everybody can relate to.
And the repercussions of that, which are, fear, anxiety, when you lose something that's important to you, and particularly because society ties our identity so much to what we do, what our profession or job is, when you lose that, he has really a lot of insight into how that impacted him and his family and his feelings about himself.
Yeah.
And we didn't even get to talk about some of the other things that happen when you do lose your job. And one thing I want to highlight is also to have some grace with yourself physically, in the sense of, say you were working every single day, every weekday, and suddenly you're not. And Arran talked a little bit about now being a stay-at-home dad, and that was a different role for him. But, there's a certain loss of routine, of ritual, that can feel really rudderless. If you're used to getting up and you have a certain routine to get ready for work, and you get in your car or you take the public transport to your job, and that kind of structure, losing structure can be very ungrounding for a lot of people and can trigger traumatic responses, because unpredictability, lack of routine, that can make you feel unsafe, or I should say that can make your brain feel unsafe. And what can happen then is, once your brain is feeling unsafe, it starts kind of bringing up other times when your brain felt unsafe. And there goes your trauma response.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if you are looking for work, if you are in a transition period, it is important. And I know it can feel tedious, but it is important to have some kind of structure for yourself. Whatever that looks like for you, having some predictability in your day is going to be helpful for your brain to be feeling secure.
Yeah. I remember when I had a job, one of my favorite jobs back in 2020, we got shut down during COVID, but I grieved after that because that was, to me, probably the best professional experience I've had. And you never know how great you have it until it's gone, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, there was a grieving process with that loss. I did identify myself by my title, and that's how I probably got a lot of self-worth. I can't say that word. Self-worth.
You got it. Yeah.
And that was maybe a mistake. Where should your self-worth come from, Michelle?
The most foundational self-worth is internal. So you truly believing and accepting that you have worth. And that's incredibly difficult for a lot of people. A lot of self-worth also comes from people you trust and respect. If you think that you have worth, that feeds into your own ideas of self-worth. But of course, in our society, most of our self-worth is we're expecting most of our self-worth to come from external sources, and empty external sources of that. Things that will never actually make us feel worthy.
I didn't mention this in our interview, but I wanted to at some point. Forgiveness. Forgiving ourselves. Things aren't always going to go perfect. Don't beat yourself up.
And forgiving others. I didn't get laid off. I walked away from a job that I found really toxic. But still, that was maybe 10 years ago. And yet sometimes at 2 a.m, I'm having conversations with myself about what I would have said to them, better, or, I still hold that anger from that experience. And it frustrates me because it's they haven't thought of me in 10 years, I'm sure. and yet I'm still, that still has power over me. And so, which that anger fuels me to try and let it go, of course. Maybe I've forgiven myself or haven't for my role in that, but at the same time, like clearly I haven't forgiven what was done to me.
Mm-hmm.
And again, forgive and forget are two very different things. You can do one and not the other.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think it's a package deal and they're not willing to forget, and so they're like, well, then I'm not willing to forgive. But you can forgive without forgetting.
Can you forget without forgiving, though?
Probably, yeah. But again, I think it's going to rear its head at some point. It's going to flare up in ways you may not expect if you haven't done some forgiving. And this is a whole other show where we actually have to define what forgiveness is, because I don't even want to have this conversation without that piece. I feel like too many people are operating from different definitions of forgiveness or what that would look like or mean. Because Arran was talking about, anger around how he was let go. And I could relate to that. Even though I wasn't let go, it's still that the situation gave me complicated feelings.
Yeah.
But I felt empowered by making the choice to walk away, which a lot of people don't have the privilege to do. But that's another thing I want to highlight from Arran's episode is that it's not as hard as we think it is sometimes to put ourselves out there.
But this is a situation where I reached out to somebody and found a guest, but ultimately our goal, Michelle, is to have people reach out to us and come on our show. So again, a reminder to our listeners, please do so. Just reach out, email us, theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com. I'll repeat that, theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com, or message us on Instagram.
And if you're ever listening to the show and you disagree with something we're saying, we want to hear about that too. We're open to feedback.
Well, I'm not, but you are. I'm just kidding.
We will summarily dismiss it, but we'll listen to it. No. Okay.
Exactly. If you're struggling with family, friends, or coworkers, in a bad relationship and wondering what to do, or you want a relationship and to set yourself up for success, then we want to talk to you. So make your appointment on Unrelating. To be a guest, ask a question, or recommend a topic, drop us an email at theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com. And be sure to follow us on Instagram or Facebook.